The different religions have different names. The Jews call the two arches together the Gate of Mercy. According to Jewish tradition,
something ancient is shifting, literally. In the heart of Jerusalem, behind layers of history and prophecy, a sealed gate stands in silent defiance of time. It's easy to overlook, yet it may hold a mystery too significant to ignore. For centuries, it hasn't moved. But now, something is stirring. Dust falls without wind. Stones groan without pressure. Is it a coincidence or something more? A story buried in stone is slowly whispering back to life. What could it mean? And why now? As watchers take notice and questions mount, one gate may be drawing the world's eyes toward an even greater return. Significance of the Eastern Gate. The Eastern Gate, also known as the Golden Gate or the Gate of Mercy, is one of the most spiritually significant locations in Jerusalem's Old City Wall. Situated on the eastern side facing the Mount of Olives, it has been sealed shut for nearly 500 years. This gate holds a unique place in both Jewish and Christian traditions because of its direct connection to messianic prophecy. According to ancient Jewish beliefs, the Messiah is expected to arrive from the east and enter Jerusalem through this very gate. In Christian theology, this expectation aligns with the path Jesus took during his triumphal entry into the city, fulfilling Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9 as he rode on a donkey, entering from the Mount of Olives and passing through the Eastern Gate. Historically, the gate was sealed in the early 16th century by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent during Ottoman rule. Though no official decree explains why, the act is widely interpreted as a deliberate attempt to block the coming of the Jewish Messiah. To reinforce this, a Muslim cemetery was established directly in front of the gate, believed to ritually prevent a priestly figure, such as the Messiah, from entering due to Jewish purity laws. This sealing of the gate was not just a political or architectural decision, but a symbolic gesture of spiritual opposition. A wall raised not just against people, but against prophecy. The prophetic meaning of the Eastern Gate can be gathered from the visions found in the book of Ezekiel. It is recorded in Ezekiel chapter 43 that the prophet sees the glory of the Lord return to the temple from the east and enter through the gate. This vision has an earlier precedent in Ezekiel 10, where the glory of God leaves the temple and departs toward the east. The actual movements of departure and return create a prophetic pattern that is resounded in the life of Jesus Christ. He went out from Jerusalem by the Mount of Olives, Acts chapter 1, and that he would return in like manner is declared in the Scripture, Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4. The Eastern Gate, therefore, becomes a marker of divine presence, waiting for the moment when the Messiah returns in glory. Today, the massive gate stands firmly locked and bolted. Eerie sounds are heard. Stones are moved. Some dust falls down occasionally, and whispers are rumored to be heard as strange vibrations take effect. Some attribute this to natural aging and structural shifting. Others among observers and scholars regard them as captured phenomena, early signs of prophetic advancement. The more this status quo continues, the more this gate turns into something other than mere historical interest. It divides what is natural from what is divine. It seems to take a place most relevant at the point where a world is in dissension and born anew within its spirit. The Eastern Gate is destined to be a silent watcher for the world that prophecy might not just be something from history, but will happen any day now. But what if this gate wasn't just closed by bricks, but by intention far deeper than politics? Historical and spiritual motives. The sealing of the Eastern Gate in Jerusalem is one of the most enigmatic decisions made during the Ottoman era. and its implications extend far beyond simple urban planning. In the early 16th century, during the rule of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, Jerusalem's walls were extensively rebuilt to fortify the city. As part of this reconstruction, Suleiman ordered the eastern gate to be permanently sealed. While no surviving edict provides a clear explanation, scholars and theologians widely interpret the decision as spiritually strategic. At the time, Jerusalem was buzzing with messianic expectations, and both Jewish and Islamic traditions acknowledged the prophetic importance of the Eastern Gate. The idea that the Messiah would eventually come from the east and enter the city through this particular gate is one of the central tenets of ancient Jewish tradition. Suleiman's decision to block the gate as a preventative measure against any perceived fulfillment of that prophecy may have been influenced by the widespread belief that existed at the time of his reign. Suleiman also ordered the building of a Muslim cemetery right in front of the gate, rather than just securing the entrance with stone. Jewish law states that Kohanim, or descendants of priests, are not allowed to enter cemeteries without being ceremonially defiled. This action would essentially erect a physical and spiritual barrier if the Messiah were to be a priest, as some traditions propose. This can be seen as a defensive move and a theological move at the same time. The Ottomans sealed the gate with a cemetery. Before it was meant to discourage the people from revolting or having messianic aspirations, but it would shut down a divine narrative in their minds as well. History, however, has shown time and again that attempting to thwart divine prophecy falls by the wayside in defeat. From pharaohs in Egypt to emperors in Rome, the biblical narrative is consistent in that resisting and attempting to detain God's plan always see the fulfillment of His word. Suleiman's deed, therefore, would have generated another chapter to the story, ironically serving to reinforce the importance of that gateway in the timeline of messianic expectation. Today, the sealed Eastern Gate is a well-known representation of both divine patience and human disobedience. Although the closure made political sense at the time, it now has significant prophetic implications. The East Gate Cemetery and its ongoing inaccessibility have sparked eschatological expectations and theological conjectures. The 16th century Sultan's sealing of the gate was more than just a defensive measure. It was a silent but significant character in a centuries-long drama. The very action that was meant to keep the Messiah from coming could just as easily be interpreted by many believers as guaranteeing his return. Ezekiel's prophetic pattern. The prophetic foundation of the Eastern Gate's significance is deeply rooted in the visions of the prophet Ezekiel, who lived during the Babylonian exile. In Ezekiel chapter 10, he describes a tragic moment when the glory of the Lord departs from the temple due to the unfaithfulness of the people. The divine presence lifts from the threshold of the temple and exits toward the east, ultimately resting on the Mount of Olives. This departure was not just a physical withdrawal, but a spiritual judgment, symbolizing God's sorrowful exit from His dwelling among His people. This eastern direction, toward the very location of the now sealed gate, became symbolically charged with prophetic meaning. Several chapters later, in Ezekiel chapter 43, the prophet sees a contrasting vision of hope and restoration. In this passage, he witnesses the glory of the Lord returning from the east, once again entering the temple. The language is vivid and awe-inspiring. The glory is radiant, the earth shines with His presence, and Ezekiel falls on his face as the Lord enters through what he calls the gate facing east. This eastward entry marks the return of God's presence to Jerusalem, reversing the earlier vision of exile. It sets a divine pattern, departure and return, that echoes throughout Scripture and serves as a template for messianic expectation. The Messiah's future arrival has been long associated by Jewish and Christian interpreters alike with Ezekiel's vision. According to the Jewish concept, the Messiah would come in through the east, heralding the divine presence and administration of God to the city of Jerusalem. The Christian faith interprets this prophecy in part through the Lord's entrance into the city from the east. Jesus crossed the Mount of Olives and entered the temple area through what is believed to be the Eastern Gate. However, it holds that the total fulfillment of Ezekiel's vision must await the second coming of Christ, when he shall return from the east and restore divine order foretold in Ezekiel and sanctioned in Acts chapter 1 and Zechariah chapter 14. Such a prophetic legacy has altered the Eastern Gate from a mere historical structure to a present symbol of divine movement and messianic hope. It is a silent testament to the visions of Ezekiel when it continues to stand, keeping an eye and waiting for the glory to enter through its arches once again. The same pattern is established in Ezekiel: presence, denial, and return, which believers take as the basic model of the timeline toward redemption. Modern times begin to rumble with hints of movement and transformation at this gate, and yet the vision fostered by Ezekiel remains a central mooring for interpreting what may be developing before our very eyes. Jesus' triumphal entry. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem shortly before his crucifixion is one of the most symbolically charged moments in the New Testament, fulfilling multiple layers of prophecy and aligning perfectly with the geography of the Holy City. According to the Gospels, particularly in Matthew chapter 21 and Luke chapter 19, Jesus approached Jerusalem from the east, descending from the Mount of Olives and crossing the Kidron Valley. This route would have led him directly to the Eastern Gate, also known as the Golden Gate or the Gate of Mercy, one of the principal entrances into the temple area at the time. His deliberate choice to ride on a donkey fulfilled the messianic prophecy of Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion! Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey." This act was not incidental. Every aspect of Jesus' journey was rich with prophetic symbolism. By riding a donkey instead of a war horse, he signaled that his kingdom was not of earthly conquest, but of peace and salvation. The crowds understood this moment's significance, shouting, "Hosanna!" and laying palm branches on the road, a clear acknowledgement of him as the anticipated Messiah. Though the Gospel accounts do not name the gate specifically, the traditional route from the Mount of Olives into the temple area would have led him through the Eastern Gate, reinforcing the messianic alignment with Ezekiel's vision of divine glory entering from the east. There is some irony in that this victory served in part to fulfill and in another part to foreshadow. The king would be received, and his purpose would not be for political conquest, but spiritual redemption. After his resurrection, Acts 1 records that Jesus ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives, the same place from which he had entered Jerusalem days earlier. This departure stands in contrast to Ezekiel's vision of the glory of God departing from the temple to the east, thereby signaling a future return from the east. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 prophesies that, "On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives to the east of Jerusalem," establishing eastward as both the divine path of his entry and return. Even at present, this kind of historical and geographical specificity resonates with believers. The East Gate has been closed for hundreds of years, but it still stands as an ever-present observer of that powerful moment in redemptive history. Jesus did not pass through this entry point only to fulfill an ancient prophecy. He also announced divine destiny. Considering the fact that Scripture promises to return in the same way and for the same cause, this place thus acts as a focal point for those watching for the signs of the second coming of the Messiah. From ascension to return. The Mount of Olives plays a central role in both the conclusion of Jesus' earthly ministry and the prophetic narrative of his promised return. Located directly east of Jerusalem, facing the sealed eastern gate, this mountain has long held spiritual significance in both Jewish and Christian traditions. According to Acts chapter 1, verses 9 to 12, after his resurrection, Jesus ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives, while his disciples watched in awe. 2 angels appeared immediately afterward, assuring them that this same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. This moment established a prophetic trajectory, eastward from the Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem, linking the physical geography to divine promise. This trajectory mirrors the prophetic vision recorded centuries earlier by Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 10, the prophet describes the glory of God departing from the temple and resting on the Mount of Olives, symbolizing a divine withdrawal due to the people's unfaithfulness. Later, in Ezekiel chapter 43, he sees the glory of the Lord returning from the east, re-entering the temple through the eastern gate. The symmetry of departure and return, both involving the Mount of Olives and the eastern approach, underscores a divine pattern that is intentionally echoed in the life of Jesus. His ascension marked the end of one phase of redemptive history, but the direction of his return, back from the east, remains prophetically aligned with these ancient visions. To the contrary, Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 presents this pattern with striking clarity. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. This passage is not figurative, but locates the vital second coming of Christ at a specific physical site on earth from which he ascended. Thus, from a biblical perspective, the Mount of Olives is not just an incidental backdrop, but an axis for spirituality. It is aligned with the eastern gate across the Kidron Valley and is a straight path that Jesus walked on his triumphal entry, and is prophesied to be taken on his return. The very precise prophetic nature gives the geography of Jerusalem an almost living reality that is pregnant with expectation. Today's Mount of Olives has a depth of expectation in its spirituality, deep enough to entice pilgrims, scholars, and prophecy watchers to it for comprehension of its sacred weight. The eastern gate, sealed and held fast in view of the mount, now serves as a lock waiting for its turn at opening. The thread is not one of vague hope, running from the ascension of Jesus as related to his prophesied return, though. It is woven throughout Scripture, from the visions of Ezekiel to the words of angels in Acts. As prophecy waits in silence, unexpected signs are quietly breaking through. Modern stirring. In recent years, both pilgrims and tour guides have reported subtle yet intriguing physical phenomena around the sealed eastern gate. Visitors describe seeing fine dust slowly falling from the filled-in archways, even when no wind or human disturbance is nearby. Alongside this, there are accounts of slight misalignment in the stones, visible as hairline cracks or gaps that weren't noticeable before. These observations come from a blend of personal testimonies and informal observations, often attributed to natural aging or seismic shifts in Jerusalem's foundational layers. Still, they resonate deeply with believers who interpret them as signs of prophetic significance tied to the gate's sacred role. More compelling are the reports of audible groans and low-frequency vibrations emanating from behind the wall. Some local guides and night watchers speak of hearing faint, almost imperceptible moans or rattles, mechanical sounding yet defying obvious explanation. One Facebook user remarked that people have been reporting strange vibrations beneath the ground, as if the very stones are groaning in anticipation. Engineers who have inspected the area acknowledge slight shifts in the masonry, but often explain them away as normal structural stress, given the gate's multi-century longevity. Yet the convergence of sound, movement, and dust remains intriguing. Doubt throws mundane sources to earn assent. The old city walls of Jerusalem slow down in eroding, thermally expand, and micro-settle over a period of time, in an area more than earthquake active. Earthquakes and daily thermal changes can cause the occasional settling or fracturing of stones. Jerusalem Post-News of 2022, however, warned that dusty accumulations could also be misinterpreted, mostly by seasonal winds depositing fine particle dust on the buildings of the city. Still, attuned souls prefer to look at these idle stirrings as more than just the inevitable wear and tear, perhaps the unmistakable breath of a spirit-waiting promise. Whether these disturbances are the result of ordinary structural processes, something more profound, the condition of the Eastern Gate has commanded global attention. Prophetic by the biblical specialists Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Acts, watchers now habitually scan the gate for signs of movement. Noticing the geopolitics of the day and spiritual renewal, even the slightest rumble or dust mote soon comes under deep scrutiny as though it were significant. Where heaven touches stone. In biblical theology, the physical and spiritual realms are deeply interconnected, with visible events often acting as mirrors of unseen realities. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3 affirms this connection, stating, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." This foundational truth suggests that material structures, especially those ordained or touched by divine purpose, can carry spiritual weight. The Eastern Gate, therefore, is more than just ancient stone and mortar. It is seen by many as a prophetic symbol, a spiritual threshold where heaven intersects with earth, waiting for a divine moment to be fulfilled. The sealed gate holds an atmosphere that many pilgrims describe as tangibly different from the rest of Jerusalem. While the Western Wall hums with prayer and the city bustles with life, the Eastern Gate is marked by an almost eerie silence, an emptiness that feels intentional. Watchers and visitors often report a sense of anticipation, as if something is being held back just behind the stone. These reactions echo biblical moments when God chose to speak not in thunder or fire, but in the still small voice, as with Elijah on Mount Horeb, 1 Kings chapter 19. Such subtlety reflects a consistent divine pattern. God moves not always with spectacle, but often with silence that speaks louder than words. The concept is woven throughout Scripture. Divine encounters often arise in familiar settings that have become holy ground by the presence of God. An example would be a burning bush in the wilderness or a manger in Bethlehem. The Eastern Gate fits this scheme. To one who observes it very closely, it is not a passive gate, quite the opposite. It is charged with meaning, almost just as a visible point where prophetic destiny hovers. The very fact that it is sealed enhances the symbolism, an avenue closed intentionally, awaiting its appropriate time, to be opened not by human thought, but by the very command of heaven itself. This act will not only denote a physical opening when it occurs, it will mean the crossing over point between eternal intention and earthly time. In this respect, the Eastern Gate serves as a sign of both hope and tension. For the believers, it reminds them that not every fulfillment comes with an ostentatious show hall. Many a time, prophecy is claimed within whispers, within dust falling out of stone, or a tremor no one notices. The gate then serves as a very physical echo of a much larger spiritual promise. What is unseen is not the same as unreal. Just as Jesus went through the gate in quiet humility, so too his return may start out very subtly, with a movement that no one recognizes, but which is understood deeply by those watching with spiritual eyes. Watchmen on the walls. Throughout Scripture, God appoints watchmen to observe, warn, and intercede for his people, individuals who stay alert when others sleep. Isaiah chapter 62 verse 6 captures this calling. I have posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. These watchmen aren't just ancient figures, but have a spiritual counterpart today. Believers attuned to prophetic movements, discerning the times, and paying attention to subtle signs that others might ignore. In the context of the Eastern Gate and Jerusalem's unfolding role in biblical prophecy, many modern-day watchers feel a strong call to remain vigilant, not out of fear or obsession, but out of reverent expectation. According to Acts chapter 1 verse 11, after Jesus' ascension from the Mount of Olives, 2 angels appeared and told the disciples, "This same Jesus will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." This message has inspired generations of believers to keep their spiritual eyes open, watching not just for world events, but for alignment with Scripture. Today, pastors, scholars, tour guides, and everyday believers are among those standing on the wall, figuratively and even literally, visiting the Eastern Gate, praying near it, or studying developments tied to its status. Reports of falling dust, shifting stones, and unusual sounds are often first noted by these watchful individuals who sense their significance beyond natural explanation. The watchmen do not give harbingers of apocalyptic headlines. They see through the eyes of people, sensitive voices that understand the fact that prophecy is often fulfilled quietly and secretly. Just like God's speaking to Elijah, who was not in earth-splitting fire, but a gentle whisper. 1 Kings chapter 19. They say that the signs of the times may well be such signs as are seen. Watching the watchmen standing along the Eastern Gate makes them feel that there is a marked difference in the silence and vibration felt on the ground from so effortless a movement in heaven. Spiritual reality, indicating that something may indeed be stirring. Watching these individuals tends to view their job not for the dates predicted, but rather for those hearts that are preparing, awake to what is a real-time prophetic movement. Watchmen have an urgent and holy task. In a world of distractions and rapid motion, these people keep the church soundly, scripture-centered, and aware of the spiritual landscape that develops in time. Global instability has increased, and Israel is once again in the throes of geopolitical and theological discussion. Their presence is becoming ever more critical. Prophecy's sacred stage. Jerusalem is more than an ancient city. It is the prophetic heartbeat of Scripture. From the moment God called Abraham to offer Isaac on Mount Moriah, Genesis chapter 22, a location many believe lies within present-day Jerusalem, the city has been set apart for divine purposes. Throughout the Old Testament, Jerusalem served as the spiritual and political center of Israel. It was where King David established his throne and where Solomon built the first temple, the dwelling place of God's presence among his people. Prophets wept over it, kings ruled from it, and psalmists sang of its beauty and destiny. No other city in Scripture receives such repeated focus, mentioned over 800 times in the Bible. In the life of Jesus, Jerusalem is once again central. It was the destination of his final journey, the site of his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. He lamented over it in Luke chapter 19, verse 42, saying, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes." This lament speaks volumes. Jerusalem was, and is, seen by God not just as a city but as a covenantal signpost. It is the place where divine interventions intersect human history. And according to biblical prophecy, it is the city where Christ will return. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 states that his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, facing Jerusalem, and from there he will enter again. In the New Testament, Jerusalem continues to be at the epicenter of the eschatological vision. The book of Revelation describes a new Jerusalem coming down from heaven where God will live with human beings forever and ever. Revelation chapter 21. This new city illustrates both continuity and fulfillment. It connects New Jerusalem, the scene of divine action, with God's eternal Jerusalem of the future kingdom. Until then, the city will remain under full war, prayer, pilgrimage, and prophecy. With political upheaval and spiritual seeking at play, Jerusalem stands as a real and symbolic axis where earthly choices and heavenly intentions meet. It is this eternal centrality that invites devotees in Psalm chapter 122 to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It is not simply an appeal for intercession. It has also acknowledged that the city is unmatched in prophetic significance. The sealed eastern gate, the Mount of Olives, and the remains of the ancient temple assign Jerusalem more than historical importance. Rather, this city is the site of past redemptive acts and projections of future ones. While the city stands as prophecy's stage, another ancient symbol may be marking time in plain sight: fig tree and the final countdown. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 to 33, Jesus tells a parable that has long intrigued scholars and prophecy watchers. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Most biblical interpreters agree that the fig tree is symbolic of Israel, and this parable is understood to point to a significant prophetic sign: the rebirth of the nation of Israel. After nearly 2,000 years of exile, Israel's miraculous restoration in 1948 is viewed by many as the budding of the fig tree, the beginning of the final countdown in God's prophetic timeline. The rebirth of Israel is not just a political or historical milestone. It is seen by many as a fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Isaiah chapter 66 verse 8 marvels, "Can a nation be born in a day?" A rhetorical question that seems to point directly to what occurred on May 14, 1948. This unprecedented event is viewed as a marker that the season of Christ's return has begun. From this moment, prophecy watchers began to see other signs intensify: global unrest, spiritual decline, and increasing natural disasters, all aligning with Jesus' warnings in Matthew 24. And nestled quietly among these signs is the sealed eastern gate, long dormant, yet increasingly drawing attention due to reports of physical disturbance and spiritual significance. When the words of Jesus were considering the eastern gate, then, "at the door," takes on a formidable relevance. If the gate represents a literal entrance for the Messiah's anticipated return, "at the door" may well be taken not merely as a metaphorical time marker, but as a reference to the physical location where the prophetic fulfillment will actually be realized. Since the rebirth of Israel, prophetic timing has seemed to undergo an incredible alignment. Sealed up since the 16th century, the gate has come to symbolize divine expectancy, its immovable stones said to be shifting, groaning, and shedding dust as though preparing for something. If you felt something stir in your spirit today, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, Leave a comment with your thoughts or questions and subscribe to stay alert to the signs and stories still unfolding. There's more to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's next. Click the video on your screen. Stay watchful. Stay ready.